All right, take my glasses off so the glare goes away. We're recording once again to my viewers. Thank you for being here. I still a very Spartan background here. The books have not yet been transferred to my new location, so sorry if it doesn't look quite as erudite. But there is a story behind this crucifix hanging on the wall behind me, which I think is kind of important. That crucifix my parents gave to me when I was 19 years old, and the first year I went to seminary in 1978. And that crucifix has followed me my entire life since then. So 44 years. I always make sure that whatever office I have or whatever room I'm doing my work, that crucifix is with me. It's been blessed by popes and everything else in between. Not personally by popes. I held it up at St. Peter's Square and it's been blessed from a massive distance, but there it is. And so, I mean, I just bring that up because I think it's very important as Catholics that we remember that sacramentals are an extremely, I think, important and tangible part of our faith life. That crucifix means a lot to me, and so there it is, and I hope we all have things like that in our life. But anyway, I enough of that. My guest today is once again Robert Mixa, the St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Fellow for Catholic Education at Word on Fire. And there was such a great response that I got from our first video. I think it was a week or two ago. They all run together in my brain now. I emailed Robert the other day and said, "Hey, let's do this again." And I thought he'd say, "No, that's enough. We talked enough." But he said, "Sure, let's do it again." So I can't thank him enough for being here yet again. And so let's get to, I have several, I'm calling this interview a kind of mopping up operation because there were little loose ends from our first conversation that I kind of wanted to follow up on. And the first thing that I want to bring up is I had two viewers send me private messages, one a priest, who asked, you held up to the camera two books by Stratford Caldecott. And a lot of people don't actually watch these interviews. They listen to them. And I always have to be aware of that. So why don't you tell the viewers two things? Number one, the names of the two books that you held up by Stratford Caldecott. And which one, and this is the question that some viewers asked of me, which one book of the two you held up, would you recommend that, say, a priest give to the teachers in his school to read?
Yeah, let me hold up. I actually have the books right next to me. I carry these things around with me. So whenever the opportunity arises, I just pull them out and I try to spread more Strat propaganda. So the two books, first one is Beauty in the Word, Rethinking the Foundations of Catholic Education. Okay.
Yes.
This is the one that came out second. It's on the Trivium. And then the one that came out first is called Beauty for Truth's Sake on the Re-Enchantment of Education. Now
that's the one that I've read.
Yeah. Now this one's on the Quadrivium, but it's more about retrieving a kind of poetic sense of a poetic knowledge, if you want. This book outlines his Catholic philosophy of education, which I think if rethinking the foundations here, you kind of get a nice overview of how he thinks about education in general, and then he gets into some of the history of education and showing kind of he has like a personalist approach in which he brings together some elements of what's typically a classical approach with a kind of more of a more modern, if you want to say romantic style of kind of a child-centered pedagogy. And he really outlines what a communio vision of education may look like here. So I would probably choose this one.
So repeat the title of the one that you would choose for those who are listening but not viewing.
Beauty in the Word, Rethinking the Foundations of Education.
There we go. Beauty in the Word, Rethinking the Foundations of Education by Stratford Caldecott. A great book. And it's Stratford was a great guy, and he is much missed. He hasn't been. When did he pass now? About 5 years ago?
Yeah, I remember maybe when I graduated from the Institute, it was 2013. I think it was around that time. one of the Avengers. I think the Avengers cast. Look at when the first Avengers came out, because they all did a video. It's up on YouTube.
That's right.
For Strat. Yeah. So it's probably 2013.
Okay, so longer ago than I remember. I was at a conference with him once in Krakow, Poland, on life. I think it was a conference on the sacredness of life. Were you at that conference by any chance?
No, I wasn't there yet. But we'll talk about Poland later. So it's
we will talk. That's why I wanted to segue into that, but we'll segue into that.
Oh,
later.
if you want, we could talk. No,
but I just before we get to that, I do want to dwell a little bit on Stratford Caldicott's vision of education and why it is that you think it's important that we promote his vision. It's not just his vision; he's sort of just a very good and articulate example of a vision that a lot of people share. If you could sort of boil it down for people, you've already started a little bit. What do you think is the essence of Stratford's approach to things?
Yeah, well, I would say that for Strat, you have the unity of beauty and truth. And in much education today, you have the separation of the two. So kind of like a sentimental thing that a lot of people may associate with Christianity. And then you have truth, which is kind of like hard and objective and in some ways almost ugly, as Nietzsche put it. So he unites the two. And, as Balthazar does, and so many others in the Communio school, which is the Christian thing. And so when you study the world, you see the world kind of all as a great gift of its beautiful maker. And so there's this desire and almost eros to know the world. So love and knowledge go together for him. And and also too, I think that he asked for a short answer. He does.
It doesn't have to be short.
There's a vision of the whole that in some ways is at the heart of education for him. It's very Platonic, almost kind of a Platonic Christian approach, which sees that once you behold that which is beyond being, the good beyond being itself, it then makes sense of all of the parts in relationship to that beautiful whole. And so then education is for a lifetime. Everything is charged with this kind of electrifying beauty that just calls you out to itself. And so when I would give this to the students and try to outline this, there was like a flame, kind of like I almost ignited a flame in them, and then they in some ways it almost spread. So it seemed like when they went into college, it wasn't this dull thing, which was job training. But but they wanted to know reality. So it seems like a good approach for a life well lived.
There you go. And I agree. And this segues into one of the things I want to talk about, which is, you and I are both of the Ressourcement School of Theology, the Communio School of Theology. And the question always arises, that's all well and good, but are we not living in what George Weigel once referred to as our metaphysical fog that you guys are all in down there in the Institute? Yeah, I had a conversation once with George Weigel, and he said to me, Schindler, the Institute, I get it. Those guys are good, but they're living off in a metaphysical fog while the rest of us are down in the trenches fighting the good fight. And of course, that's absurd in many ways, because it's a kind of anti-intellectual disparagement of the need to do good metaphysics and good theology. But whether or not he was motivated by pure intentions or not, Weigel, I did think, put his finger on a question that a lot of people ask, which is, how does one translate the ethereal notions of the transcendental properties of being and their circumcision and their unity and the unity of truth, goodness, beauty, love, blah, blah, blah. They're all convertible. Love and being are convertible, and gift and reception, Schindler and blah, blah. After a while, your head is spinning and you say, okay, now what does that mean in how we teach math to a ninth grader in a Catholic school?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I have a funny story about Weigel. I don't know if I can. I've ran into
go ahead.
I've ran into Weigel a couple times, and actually he has helped me immensely, especially with like, meeting people in Poland, his connections in Krakow and all that.
He's a great guy. I love George Weigel. Yeah,
for sure.
Wonderful
But
man.
I remember years ago when I was working at Mundelein Seminary, Bishop Barron invited him out to give. It was, I think, around the time when John Paul II was canonized, and so he gave a talk at Mundelein Seminary, and you could go on YouTube and look up the video. I filmed it, the video myself, but I had to mic him before that. And Bishop Barron, Bishop Barron was kind of joking with him, like, "Oh, hey, here's Bobby Mixa, who just graduated from the John Paul II Institute," and he's saying all this while I'm miking up Weigel, and Bishop Barron was always kind of teasing me because I was hoping he'd get like Stanislav Griegel to come out and talk on John Paul II, and I was happy he got Weigel, but so. Anyways, I was miking up Weigel, and then Weigel just says, "Oh, you're one of those Branch Davidians." Anyways, I didn't get it right away because I was when that whole Branch Davidian thing happened, I was just still a little tiny kid, and so I'm like, "Wait a minute here." So I looked it up, and I'm like, "You Weigel, you got me." So I know I had to. I went and I was like, okay, I'm going to ask him the first question. I was like preparing for months for my, my comeback, kind of like George Costanza in Seinfeld. And so,
the jerk store call.
Yeah, I know. So I took the mic right away, even though I'm supposed to be the guy filming. And I took the mic and I asked him a question about his interpretation of how does he interpret one of John Paul II's encyclicals in light of something by Pope Benedict and da-da-da-da-da. And the only thing Weigel said was he corrected me in my Latin pronunciation. So it was, wow. So I'm still now like Costanza thinking about like, what next time I run into Weigel, what could I say?
Yeah, you still have your jerk store retort waiting to be played. So yeah, but that comment about the branch, that comment about the Branch Davidians is exact. It's just a different way of saying what he said to me about the metaphysical fog. The point being, there's an insularity. Yeah. There that not that I think it is insular, just that's the accusation. That's what people think. It's, in other words, classic ivory tower over intellectualism, isolated in their little enclave there in Washington, and having no greater impact further on the church because none of it's been translated into a practicable program. Now, this is, though, that's a lie. That's not true. And that's why I think Stratford Caldecott's books are so important. Yeah. Because here we have an actual attempt to take that theology and that metaphysic and to translate it into an educational program.
Exactly. And there's another guy who's actually out in England who wrote a book called Out of the Classroom and Into the World. His name is Roy Peachy. And I think his book is the best, like, practical guide to how to do this. And there's so many resources out there to do this well. I would say one of the best, like, practical things that people could do is look at I have this old handbook of nature study. I know nature study can, you'll find that in some of the actual, like, St. Jerome's Academy and St. Jerome's Institute, that those are the schools that are founded by some institute professors like Dr. Michael Hanby. Right. They're practically trying to do this stuff so it doesn't remain in the metaphysical fog. But I think that a retrieval of some of the stuff that was going on in the early 20th century is really important. What I'm talking about is like this big, massive. I would go over there and grab the book. It's called A Handbook of Nature Study, but like really practically focusing on ways to get kids to attend to things, cultivating like habits of silence and self-control is really important in the classroom. How to do that well in today's world. I think that one of the first things you could do as a teacher is to just not be so dependent upon technology. But if you do have to use technology, you use it well. And there are a lot of like programs out there that I think creatively show how to do that. But I think too, like a lot of the people who go into the classroom inspired by maybe the metaphysical fog, they don't have good pedagogy. They don't know, they don't have much experience as teachers. And so the problem is like, well, is it really the best thing to go into a third grade classroom and give the kids Greek? I mean, I've heard criticism from many people of this, like how to make this stuff work. But I do think that Weigel's critique is he's hitting on something. I
think that the answer has got to be some version of a classical approach to education, because the modern approach that atomizes each discipline as kind of subspecialties of this, that, and the other thing, and having no connection with one another, and everything is oriented towards employment and job and making money, and technology is being used out the wazoo. Of course, you do have to prepare students for the world, and you do have to introduce them to technology, and you have to prepare them for the work world. But unless that is embedded in this broader vision, then indeed it's just going to mimic modern secular education, and people are then going to fall away from the faith, because the faith is now compartmentalized. It's just one of those little sub-disciplines, and you end up comparing an 8th grade knowledge of the faith with an adult level knowledge of everything else, and it all falls apart, as we see. And so you brought up something that I think is also very, very important. You brought up the thing about nature study. And as you were talking, I was just getting ready to ask you a question, Robert, which is, I have been familiar with schools that place a great premium on things like, tactile skills, learning artisanal skills. Like my wife spins wool. We have sheep, and she spins the wool, and she teaches people how to process fleece and spin wool. You think, well, what's that got to do with a classical education? And yet it does. Or stargazing, learning the constellations, going outside at night and learning how to use a telescope, or lying flat on your back and watching shooting stars, or trying to figure out what the constellations are. Or going on a hike, a nature hike, where you identify different kinds of trees, flora, fauna. That all seems maybe kind of grade schoolish, but it isn't. Because at the end of the day, in this day and age, it's a huge success if you just get people away from their iPhones for 5 minutes.
Yeah. I think that, we're living in a mediated world, right? And so we just, the reason I brought up nature study is because it's like a step beyond that. In some ways closer to this kind of like, the things in front of you. That's what a lot of, I think, our students are not getting. They're always receiving it through some kind of filter. And so one of the, I think he was a friend of Hans von Balthasar, Adolf von Portmann. He has a book on just animal patterns. And in that book, he talks about like his, the best lesson he got in life was just his love of drawing animals. And I think like if you get students to recognize patterns, particularly as they show up, in the natural world, then
that's interesting.
It's a way of actually then seeing, in some sense, that the pattern, the logos of it all. And so that's why I think like the metaphysical fog, you're always going to, though, have to eventually get there. The problem is if you just are too heavy on that right away, and you don't have like the concrete steps to that and show, a little bit lower on the rung of the ladder, like how you get there, then I think you can create some confusion. It doesn't really have much practical worth, but eventually you will get there.
But I do, and I love that. I mean, I think you've just nailed it, and I think that's an essential part of any classical education or classical approach to education. However, as I said in our last video, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think this is very true. My mantra has always been, even back when I was academic dean at DeSales for one ill-fated year. Personnel is policy. Yeah. And none of this matters. None of this talk matters. And it will still remain in the realm of metaphysical fog if you don't have the right people, to implement it. So, like a priest wrote to me and said, which one of these Stratford Caldecott books should I have my teachers read? And okay, so now we've recommended one. And in the back of my head, my next question is, do you have the kinds of teachers that would benefit from reading this book?
Yeah.
Or they're going to read it and say, what the hell is this about? I have no idea what this is about. Get this. I mean, what's this got to do with me teaching math? Yeah. All right. And unless you have teachers that can comprehend what it is you're trying to do, and where do you find those teachers? And then where do you find, like if you mentioned St. Jerome's, and that's all well and good, but isn't there a process of self-selection going on too, in terms of the student body that choose to attend, the parents that choose to send their children there? So you already have a kind of ready-made audience for a classical education. Yeah. So maybe, this leads me to my point, maybe the model that we're proposing isn't going to be able to just sort of, let's have the American bishops adopt this model and then ship it out to every Catholic school in America. Maybe we just have to start by planting little St. Jerome seeds here, there, and everywhere to act as a kind of charter school for here's how you do this. Yeah. All right. If you have the right teachers and the right kind of students, you really can do this, and it does work. And maybe we can do it more often than we think. It's just that we give up, throw up our hands, and don't even try.
Yeah. Well, I think, just trying is the first step. I mean, I think that things will work as you try it. Things will work itself out. This is not the solution to everything. And in fact, I mean, education is just constantly changing. We're going to have so many colleges closing. Catholic schools are closing all around. And so trying this stuff out is like a step in the right direction. But even if you just have, the math teachers, biology teachers, and other faculty perhaps won't get this. But I think you'd be shocked, or you probably know this already, Larry, the wonders that one theology teacher can do. I mean, we talked about logos earlier. I mean, I was in some ways, instead of teaching theology proper, I was just trying to get the students to kind of see the unity of all the sciences, and really, really making a lot out of the etymology or the names of the classes they were taking. So I'd say, biology. Okay. You've heard Bishop Barron do this before, but bios and logos. Okay. But to get them to think about, well, what's the point? Why are you taking that course? And so to have one teacher who just asked the question, even to ask the question, why is a Catholic, like you said, a Catholic school why does it even exist? It may plant a seed that you may not then see like, oh my gosh, the school is like entirely transforming overnight, but it may do something. So slowly.
Yeah. I can't believe how much we're on the same wavelength, because as I finished my statement about planting seeds, the next question or the idea that popped into my head was, well, if you don't have all the pieces in place to create a full-blown classical school that's going to work for you, at the very least, start hiring the right theology teachers who can then do that integrating for the students. I mean, when I was at DeSales University, this is what Dr. Rodney Hauser and I did, and I might say we did quite effectively. I mean, how many times we'd have students come in and in their student evaluations at the end of the semester, they would say, I dreaded taking this required theology class. I don't believe in God. I'm one of these religious nuns, and I couldn't care less. And I was, this is going to be catechism shoved down my throat. And then they would come into the class and find this powerful integrating intellectual experience where all the logoi of their education came together in this beautiful tapestry, and they came alive. And they said, in the end point of their evaluation, but I ended up liking this class not only better than I thought, but it became my favorite class. And then there can be a ripple effect out into the rest of the school. As I mentioned the last time, there were several professors at DeSales who, were pretty agnostic, and then got involved in conversations with guys in the theology department. All of a sudden, there's a conversation going on.
Yeah.
So in many ways, that's where you have to start.
Yeah.
Baby steps, Dr. Marvin, baby steps. And that's
Yeah.
an allusion to an old movie that nobody probably remembers. What About Bob with Bill Murray? But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking too about the late Christopher Alexander, pattern language. I'm kind of like you're say the structure of the space that you're in does make a difference too, to like what goes on in the school. If your school looks like a factory, it's going to have a certain approach to education, perhaps. But I think, okay, so if it's really hard to find personnel, like nobody is moving to your locality, you can't find the right teachers, and maybe there's only a couple that really are making a difference, and say you're like an administrator and you can do something architecturally. I think that by attending to the space, for example, where's the chapel in your school? Like, is it in some ways a closet at the very far end that has nothing to do with the community? Or like, okay, then also look at the architectural design of the chapel itself. Is it at all integrated with the life of the mind that's going on here? So I think that in some ways, if you have like a certain structure in place architecturally, you can do a lot there as well. I just so happen to be teaching across from Mundelein Seminary, and I had the seminary's campus was, and then the history of what Cardinal Mundelein wanted to do with Mundelein Seminary. He wanted it to be a university, right? It is University of St. Mary of the Lake, but he wanted to have something like a Newman's idea of the university to realize itself around the lake, in which you had like the medical school, the school of law, all that stuff. But then having the chapel, actually, the liturgy is the highest point of the whole campus, and it gradually ascends to that. But I was thinking, well, how could we somewhat implement that even in the school that I was teaching in? Because and they are doing a renovation right now, but the students want to make sense of the world that they're in. And I think the picture that they are getting right now isn't really something that's desirable. And so once they start to see this pattern that could even be in the architecture of the school, and then also there's a pattern in the way you teach the class and the content of the class, and then all the classes, then that might be a step in the right direction.
I agree. I mean, I think architecture is big. I remember I taught at while I was working on my doctoral dissertation, I was teaching at an all-girls Catholic prep school in Princeton, New Jersey. Stewart Country Day School of the Sacred Heart. It was run by Sisters of the Sacred Heart. We called them Gucci nuns because their schools were always catering to the rich, the Sacred Heart schools. And this one was no exception. And the chapel, the lone chapel, was this tiny little room in the basement of the school. And you walked in, and it was very Spartan, and there was this huge boulder that was from the grounds when they built the school in the 60s. And that was the altar. And then there were some barren pews around this stone. I think there was a crucifix on the wall and a stone and some barren pews, and that was clear in the basement. And I remember thinking as a religion teacher there, well, it's kind of hard to accentuate the importance of a religious vision to the overall education of the school when you essentially are so embarrassed by the faith that you have buried your chapel in the basement. So I think you're absolutely true. I think it's absolutely right. So what time is it here? Okay, well, we got plenty of time. At least I do. I hope you do.
Yeah.
I want to move on to something that I think is related and something that you're familiar with. Polish Catholicism. I'm half Polish. My viewers may not know that Chapp is an anglicized Polish name. And my father's Polish. His mother's maiden name was Druzinski. And so there's a lot of Polishness running through my veins. And
my wife said, Chapp, you're going to go talk to Chapp today, right?
Chapp.
Yeah.
Apparently, the original name of my family was CZOP, Chapp, and it got changed to Chapp somehow. How that happened, I don't know. But anyway, here I am. So my point, though, is this. We've been discussing Catholic education.
Yeah.
And to me, a subtext to that conversation and people criticize me for this because I tend to be rather scorched earth. I think the worldview of modernity is toxic to the faith. I think secular liberalism is toxic to the faith. And I think the more we try to accommodate ourselves to Western value, modern secular Western values, the more we are going to simply sign our own death notice as a church. And so I look at countries like Ireland that sort of eventually morphed into, the Celtic tiger, the booming Irish economy. All of a sudden they moved from their stucco homes to what one Irish guy I knew called, yes, now we have our little stick homes, the men lumber and framed like Americans have.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden nobody in Ireland practices the faith anymore. I mean, it's quickly becoming a completely secular country. Now, it seems to me that a similar process is going on in Poland. And as my viewers may or may not know, you are married to a Polish woman, and you have been to Poland and have some knowledge, therefore, of Polish Catholicism. So what is your take on this? Is it because Poland has, in a sense, westernized, modernized, technologized? It's become like America in Eastern Europe. Is that the reason?
I think definitely that has a role to play. Definitely. I mean, not going back to America here, but I get really in my times of darkness. I oftentimes think, oh well, is this whole reviving Catholicism in Catholic schools, or just having a Catholic school in general, is it just impossible here? And sometimes I think, because of our way of life. And I think that once if you want to say that consumerism is becoming kind of an issue in Poland, they don't have nearly the spending potential that we do. And but you're seeing all these kind of shopping malls pop up all over the place in Poland. And this is kind of becoming like a little bit of the new liturgy there, or at least a competing one. Whereas under communism, I mean, they didn't have much. The people were dependent on each other for survival purposes. And the church was an authority. I mean, you had strong leaders like Wyszynski and Wojtyła. And so there's a lot of things going on in Poland right now, but I do have to stress this. When I walk down Nowy Świat in Warsaw, which is like the main drag, I mean, and they have daily masses going on, like during the weekday, like during the lunch hour, they're packed. The churches are still packed. And I've also, too, I think this is something that's important to keep in mind. My wife tells me this, not because she's down on Polish priests, but because she thinks that sometimes there's a little bit of a standard that they think when Polish priests sometimes say, oh, hey, it's getting really bad in Poland. And I do think they're onto something there. John Paul II saw a lot of problems back in the 1960s when he wrote Love and Responsibility. With the sexual revolution and all that. But I think that they also have to see, well, actually, their churches are pretty well packed. And I do think that there is somewhat of a problem of perhaps maybe people are doing it out of habit, going to church and all of that. But yet when I go to Poland, I mean, the hospitality is phenomenal there. And so I think that also the way they celebrate Christmas, Easter, continues. It keeps the Catholicism going. One of my friends said, "Food is culture," and if you take the time to make food, especially around those holidays, and there's so much involved in it, and all the kind of dishes and Polish. For Polish feast days has some kind of religious significance. It's really hard to avoid religion there. But I do think that the charge of Poland becoming secularized is right. I don't think it's going to be like Ireland necessarily. I don't necessarily. I don't see that. There are a lot of young Polish people that I know that are really, really, really on fire for the faith. But yeah, there are also a lot of other Polish people who are kind of pretty hostile to the church because of the sex abuse scandal that is a little bit more coming to light more recently there, and some other stuff because of politics. There's, the political situation there is very different than it is here. And politics, like church and the state, is also viewed a little bit differently. And so oftentimes, it is here too, right? Where the church can be seen as, just that one political option. So I think some of that is going on as well. But I have to say, I don't see it going down the same route as Ireland.
Well, that's very encouraging. That's why I wanted to ask you, the world-renowned expert on Poland, that is, Mixa. Yeah, you're the closest thing I have to a Polish guest. So just.
Well, I'll be there in 2 weeks, so maybe it's completely secularized now. But I think this Ukrainian thing actually might. I'm not saying there's anything good about the Ukrainian war, but see how they love each other. That
it brings me to a point of how complicated, culturally speaking, religion can be. So, for example, the Irish, so identified with the Catholic Church in many ways for reasons of faith, but also maybe equally, if not more, for reasons of we just want to stick it to the British. And being Catholic is a badge of Irish resentment and resistance to the oppression of the British. And I felt like, Polish people have been that way, not just with the Soviets, but for centuries. How often has Poland been overrun, carved up? It was this big, then it was this big, and then this big, and then it wasn't at all, and now it's back again. And through it all, there were only a couple of things that held Poland together: its language and its religion.
Yeah.
And so my fear is this: as I see Ireland, when there's no longer that common foe, the British that they all hate so much, that's kind of withered and died, because now the Irish pretty much share British culture. It's all this Western consumerist, capitalist, liberal, blah, blah, blah. And so it's the same TV culture, internet culture. So what's the beef? My fear is that Poland was going to go down that route, but you're saying not so fast, my friend. Sometimes it isn't apples and apples. Sometimes it really is apples and oranges. Poland is not Ireland. And even though there is some corrosive effect of Westernization going on, you're saying that this is being exaggerated.
Well, okay, I have to be careful with saying that, because last time I was in Warsaw, I talked to a nun and she said, Poles are fighters. Being married to a Polish woman, I know that. There's a phrase called Matka Polska, and she fights for the language, right, and the culture in the home. And my wife is definitely a Matka Polska. But this nun told me that, since the Poles are fighters, when they don't have a clear, when they don't have someone to fight against, they end up fighting amongst each other. And so this is, I think, happened of late. And it'll be interesting, though, to see what will happen in the next couple of years, because of this war in Ukraine. But also, I don't think that. I'm not sure if the church has the same status that it did under like a Wyszynski and a Wojtyła. There are some exceptional bishops in Poland who are true leaders. But it's really hard too, because, the I have to say, like, the LGBT stuff is extremely aggressive in Warsaw and Kraków, some of the other big cities. And if you watch like Polish Netflix, it's like that stuff is like on steroids compared to some of the stuff that we have here even. And so I think that there's a lot of it's a cultural battle right now in Poland, for the heart of Poland. And I do think that, looking to the West and seeing the success, financial, economic success of the West may turn some of the younger people away. But I have a hard time seeing that it's just like the older generation of Poles who are still hanging on to the Catholicism, because The church will definitely, I think, get smaller in Poland, but the Catholicism in Poland is so wrapped up with like so many like very like going on pilgrimage, public displays of the faith, that it doesn't have as much of the kind of privatization of the faith that you have here. That might be actually some good seeds for like a new evangelization in Poland. But I've talked to a lot of Polish Dominicans, and they're like, "Hey, can Word on Fire? We're going to be going. We may be in the same situation that you guys are in now in like 30 years. So I want to talk to some Word on Fire people about evangelization and all that stuff." But sometimes I'm like seeing, well, what are you guys already doing? I'm like, I think that's really good. Just continue doing some of that. Tim O'Malley, by the way, Dr. Tim O'Malley will be in Poland. Maybe some of those talks will be filmed talking about U.S. Catholicism, but it'll be interesting to, I think the Polish Dominicans invited him.
Tim O'Malley from Notre Dame.
From Notre Dame will be in Poland.
Yeah, my wife knows him, and I would love to get him on this show. I'd love to interview Tim. So, Tim, if you're watching, which you probably aren't, I'd love to have you on here. It's not that I have lots of people who want to come on here, so I've got some things stacked up. So, but I'd love to have Tim on here to discuss that, because to me, this is an important question. This whole issue of culture and the decline of Catholicism. I'm heartened and encouraged by what you say, but I'm also a bit skeptical, because what we have seen is how fast the bottom can fall out. Yeah. We have seen how quickly things can turn if there is a subculture, at least in place, that is resistant to Catholicism. So that's kind of my fear, that it will change quickly like that. I remember I've only been in Poland once, and I was at a conference at Krakow, and I remember walking around. I don't know what that big, huge main piazza is. I can't remember the name of it.
I think it's just the main square.
Yeah, and I remember seeing, this was like 15 years ago now, if not longer. I remember seeing teenage girls and guys walking around with pink spiked hair and all kinds of goth stuff, and 18 nose rings and earrings and cheek piercings and black boots and black makeup. And I'm thinking, oh, so the goth culture has reached Poland like 10 years after it was in the United States. It sort of trickled over here. But to me, that was, and it wasn't just one or two of them, and they were everywhere. And I remember thinking, ooh, this is not that people who are goth, you can be Catholic and goth, but it does represent a subculture that tends to not be churchy. Let's just put it that way. All right.
Yeah. I don't, I do see that secularization is coming. I just think there are still some hopeful signs of a change, and who knows? Who knows how this is all going to play out? And I don't know the Irish situation that well. Yeah. But yeah.
Well, okay. Well, now that you have at least given us some hope that maybe, just maybe, there is hope for the Polish church. Let me look at my notes here. I don't have my glasses on. So I did want to talk a little bit about Word on Fire and what it is that you guys do. Because one of the Stratford Caldecott's big points is, of course, beauty, that nothing attracts people more to a certain educational project than if it is tied up with something that is beautiful. Ultimately we choose things because we desire them, and we desire them because they're attractive to us in some, even Aquinas said, we choose things always under the aspect of the good, and the good has to be desirable, which means in some sense, as Balthasar would say, it has to have a lumen, a light, a splendor to it. So that seems to me to be, I'm supposedly, allegedly writing a book for Word on Fire, although it's been pushed into the future as I'm doing things like this instead. But I was looking through the Word on Fire list of here's what Word on Fire stands for. And man, beauty is right there at the top. Teaching through beauty. What does that mean, really, Robert? To you.
Teaching through beauty?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, going to like really particulars again. I when I taught, I try to really, embody that by exposing them to certain works of art, not necessarily like things from the past, um, but looking at some of the things that they find beautiful, and I'd always have them actually write out some of the things that they love when I started the course, and I also would ask them for like, what do they like musically? What do they like in other domains like sports and all these other
Yeah.
things that have a certain, perfection, embedded within them, certain kind of, there's, if you want to say, yeah, certain splendor there. And then we just analyze them as a class. So for example,
Yeah.
if they found like a Lady Gaga song, if they liked it, I would ask them if they liked it, and they say, "Yeah, okay, I like Poker Face." I'm like, well, why do you like it? And then they explain that to me, and then I would say, okay, well, is that? Let's just think about that. What does that song do for you? Okay, well, it's a good song to go clubbing to. Okay, and I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about the beauty of clubbing. What does that involve? And then you go further and further. Okay, so then I give them a
Yeah.
piece of Mozart. I actually sometimes would show them parts from the movie Amadeus, and I think
Yeah. I
it's
love that movie.
yeah. When is it Salieri? What's the guy's
Yeah.
name? Okay,
Yeah. Salieri.
when he talks about hearing Mozart for the first time and listening to that note, just almost kind of like an eternal note just coming from above down to us, and then ascending the souls. The students inevitably would like Mozart. That was really funny. I had one time a student say, I don't like Mozart. And I think I got in trouble for this, but I said, well, then the problem's not with Mozart. Trust me, the problem is with you. So you have to also put the conditions in case.
That's interesting. Yeah. I hope you didn't get in trouble for that, because I often get in trouble for making the following statement, which is, I personally do not like reading Shakespeare.
Mm.
And I don't like going to Shakespearean plays because it's too much work.
Yeah.
It's too much work. Now, to me, that is a deficiency in me, and not a deficiency in Shakespeare. I can recognize the objective beauty of Shakespeare and say, that is something I ought to desire.
Yeah.
But don't for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. But I think that like you don't need to have something as complex as like Shakespeare and something like
Right.
Mozart. You can start like something like, I don't know, Polish composer Wojciech Kilar has some of the most beautiful movie soundtracks around, and you can see, well, actually, there's a melody there. You can analyze the proportionality of it, and then you could see that there's a structure to the beautiful itself. And so there's this objective thing. It's not just kind of a matter of taste. And so I always would start with those examples, or even just going for like a walk and finding a landscape to be beautiful. You can't do that necessarily in a class, but luckily I had a nice view in my room. And we would just start to look at all of these things like proportion. We'd start to like think about like all the way Thomas Aquinas would talk about the beautiful, and it would come to light for them.
Yeah.
So
and it would involve a discussion too of what constitutes art and the
yes.
artistic. And so things like great literature, I think great film is a huge way
yes.
to introduce beauty. And you know what?
Even like if they like automobiles, I love Porsche. I mean, Richard Decloux used to work for Porsche, and like Porsche represents a model of excellence.
Richard Decloux used to, a Word on Fire fellow, the De Lubac fellow, used to work for Porsche. Well, I need to re-interview him then. Hey, look, this is a great conversation, and I don't mean to end it soon, but I have been using natural light instead of any kind of a ring light during this. And as you can see, I've suddenly turned rather ghoulish and spooky. It's dark in here, and that's because outside of this window is a massive thunderstorm brewing. You and I were supposed to do this interview later.
Yeah.
I moved it up earlier because of so the storms are blowing in. So I want to end this now and get this processing before maybe I lose internet, lose power, or whatever.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And all this means maybe we'll have to have you back again someday, Robert, to discuss beauty. But anyway, I do want to thank my viewers, and I'm going to stop this now rather quickly and abruptly so that I don't lose the feed. Thank you, everyone, very much.
Thanks, Larry.